Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World. We are in session two of our broadcast here on Hilaal TV, and let me welcome the Minister of Communications, Minister Solly Malatsi. Minister, thank you so much for joining us here.
It's a pleasure to join you.
Minister, obviously throughout the week, or throughout the year, I beg your pardon, there have been discussions on the digital divide. How are we in terms of where South Africa is, in terms of making sure that its discussions of bridging the digital divide, especially within the global south, in this G20 context?
You're absolutely correct. One of the focal areas for us in the digital economy working group has been on meaningful digital connectivity. It is something that both India and Brazil focused on during their presidency and for continuity, but more importantly, in recognition of the fact that you still have approximately 23% of South Africans, which translates to 13 to 15 million people who wake up every day without access to broadband connectivity. The picture is far worse globally, where it's estimated that approximately 3 billion people wake up every day without access to broadband connectivity. And to put our collective focus into that, the other focus has been on digital public infrastructure and the strengthening of those in order to improve citizens' general interaction with their governments digitally, and also on artificial intelligence. We all recognize the impact that artificial intelligence has become so ingrained in our daily lives, both from a productivity perspective, but also in terms of great use of new technologies to open up new industries, to open up new areas for economic growth and development. But there are serious concerns around the ethical use of AI, and it is for that purpose that we have advocated for a much more protection of people's individual rights and dignity, so that AI, enhances humanity and human rights rather than risk violating them, and also to promote the use and recognition of our diverse cultures, insofar as making sure that large language models reflect the diversity and cultural depth of different communities in the world.
You know what's interesting about artificial intelligence, Minister Malatsi, is that it seems to be a consensus amongst the G20 nations that it has to be part of the global economy. But you speak of regulation. I think we start off at home here. There was something that happened in this week where we saw a network outage that had occurred, I beg your pardon. And of course, artificial intelligence sort of apps went down in that very moment. And this, of course, opens up the opportunities for there to be gremlins within the system. How has the G20 addressed that in trying to make sure something like this does not happen?
Sure.
Because it really opens up Pandora's box where we don't want to be going into.
Yeah. Look, there are risks with any evolving new technologies, and I think the risk of manipulative generative AI is one that concerns the world. I think the world was taken aback at the instant impact and disruption that DeepSeek had, for instance, right? And it requires that we put enough guardrails and safeguard measures in place to minimize risk. You're always gonna get nefarious elements that are testing, or how to manipulate gaps. The most important thing is to have a unified approach towards standardization and towards cross-border management of flow of information, and making sure that regulations are harmonized from a regional perspective, a continental perspective, and globally.
Minister Malatsi, we've seen the declaration being adopted by the G20 nations. Nobody thought this would have happened within probably the first 3 hours of today's G20 Leaders Summit. From a minister, your portfolio, your reaction to this declaration, which has been unanimously adopted by the G20 nations.
It's a great thing. Great things are happening in South Africa.
And do you think this will now allow for there to be global South economic inclusivity? because that is what President Ramaphosa has been touching on.
Look, I think that is a continuous mission to achieve that, not just in words but in actual deeds and deliverability. And I think, listen, it bodes well for the future of the G20 that this G20 presidency of the South Africa also got to the adoption of the declaration. It is what multilateralism is about, and it is a great thing. And I'm proud as a member of the South African government that during our presidency, the ability to adopt a declaration was done, notwithstanding some of the headwinds that we've had to deal with.
Minister Solly Malatsi, absolute pleasure having you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Minister Solly Malatsi, Minister of Communications, joining us here to discuss, of course, what his working group has been doing within the G20 presidency of South Africa. Do stay tuned. After the break, we'll have more for you at the G20 Leaders Summit here at Nasrec, Johannesburg.